Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. In our last episode, we compared the training and organization between the Stormtrooper Corps and the US Marine Corps. Today, we'll be continuing this series by looking at their weapons and vehicles. Now, I realize I said this was going to be a two-parter, but there's a lot to cover, so we're going to have to extend this to a third video. In that third video, we'll be looking at the combat tactics of both organizations, including the combat history. Make sure you subscribe down below so you don't miss out on that video. So let's start by looking at the small arms of the Stormtroopers. The most famous and well-known being the standard issue E11 blaster. This carbine blaster is extremely light and small, making it very easy to maneuver in confined areas like inside of a ship or in urban spaces. The E11 also holds an impressive 200 shots in one power cell and 500 shots in a larger plasma cartridge, which means the average Stormtrooper carries much less weight and ammunition than a Marine would. The E11 also has 3 firing modes, which include lethal, sting, and stun. Not really sure why you want to sting someone, but hey, why not? Your average Stormtrooper squad will also have a marksman carrying the DLT-20A laser rifle for longer range engagements, along with a DLT-19 heavy blaster, which will be carried by an auto rifleman. DLT-19 was quite bulky and very similar to the DC-15A used by the clones during the onset of the war. The SE-14R was a common sidearm used by Stormtrooper officers and scouts. The main problem with Stormtrooper weapons wasn't the design of the blasters necessarily, but how these weapons integrated into Stormtrooper armor, or how they didn't integrate. There's also the natural disadvantages that blasters have compared to firearms, and we did an entire video about that, so check that out later after you watch this video. Now, it's a common misconception that Marines are given hand-me-down or inadequate weapons when compared to the rest of the US military. The Marine Corps is well equipped for the job at hand, and although they might not have as much firepower as the Army, they have some of the most lethal riflemen in the military service. Combat Marines are typically deployed with the M4 carbine, which replaced the longer barrel M16A4. Like the Stormtroopers and their view of the DC-15A, the Marines wanted a shorter barrel on their main combat rifle. Although it should be noted that most non-combat Marines are still issued an M16A4. It also should be noted that most fire teams have a grenadier who carries either an under-rifle grenade launcher or independent grenade launcher. For the support machine gunner role, the Marines use the M240 and the lighter M249 SAW. The Marine Corps also uses the M27 IAR as an all-around replacement rifle. It only weighs 9 pounds, only 2 pounds heavier than the M4, and much less compared to the M240's 26 pounds and the SAW's 22 pounds. Where the M27 IAR really stands out is its long-range accuracy. That's because it has a 16.5-inch barrel. The Marines found that it was quite important to be able to engage enemies at long range, especially in more rural areas of Afghanistan and Iraq. But at the same time, the M27 is considerably larger than the M4. It has a longer barrel, which makes it impractical in CQB situations, especially if there's a suppressor attached. The M27 IAR also lacks the continuous firepower that a belt-fed machine gun would have. So why do I talk so much about the M27 IAR and its vetting process into the Marine Corps? Well, one, it's because I'm a military buff and this kind of stuff is interesting to me, and two, more in relation to this video, this is an example of the Marine Corps constantly field testing and looking to improve their weapons. So even though there is a lot of politics and money involved in weapons acquisition for the Marine Corps, and even if you hate the IRA platform, at least they're still trying to do something to improve their armament. Because if you look at the Stormtrooper Corps, they've used the E11 blaster as their main infantry weapon from the rise of the New Order until the Battle of Endor. And the Stormtroopers' mission has clearly changed during that time. While the E11 is a small and less intimidating blaster, which makes it perfect for civilian patrols and pacifications in urban centers, towards the end of the Galactic Civil War, the Stormtroopers had returned to fighting on larger battlefields, sometimes having to engage enemies at extreme distances. And although the Empire classifies the E11 as a blaster rifle, it clearly has a barrel of a submachine gun, which is definitely inadequate, especially against a far superior assault blaster rifle platform like the A280 that the Rebels use. Now we have two organizations which have body armor designed for two different types of munitions. Stormtroopers wear full head-to-toe body armor made out of Duraplast composites. It stops thermal energy by spreading it across the entire surface of the armor. While Stormtrooper armor does have some ballistic and kinetic protection, it's mainly focused on stopping explosive forces and shrapnel. The Marine Corps has a different approach. Instead of full-body armor, they use the tactical modular vest, which has ballistic bulletproof armor in certain vital areas. These ballistic plates are designed to stop modern-day firearms and not necessarily superheated plasma bolts. It should be noted that these plates are usually made out of very advanced ceramic composites which have extremely high heat tolerance. This is why similar materials are used on heat shields for re-entry vehicles by space organizations. So it is very possible that these ballistic plates can also withstand a blaster bolt. These ceramics are usually combined with Kevlar or other aramid fibers that also have high heat tolerance. Because the Stormtrooper armor covers the entire body, it also has the added benefit of a climate control system inside of it. Although this system is known to break down, and whenever they're deployed in extremely hot areas, the suit can actually be a huge liability. Although the Stormtrooper lid can obscure the viewer's vision, the helmet does give the wearer protection from concussive forces, and there's also air scrubbers built inside the helmet to protect them from toxins and gases. Also, there's a HUD system that overlays important information. Although for some reason there is no targeting system that is connected to their blaster, which is a huge oversight. Especially because most Stormtrooper weapons seem to only have iron sights on them. And it's almost impossible to properly shoulder a rifle and use an iron sight with such a bulky helmet and armor. Stormtroopers also don't seem to carry any packs into battle. Most of their equipment is attached to their utility belt on their armor. The only units that have a larger load with them are machine gunners with portable generators on their back. We're not really sure why Stormtroopers don't have packs on them. It could be that they're deployed in a different way. Maybe logistics are handled in a different way from the Marine Corps or other Earth-based infantry forces. But it should be noted once again that blaster munition is a lot smaller and lighter to carry than regular ammunition we use here on Earth. So Stormtrooper armor provides better overall protection but fails to protect from fatal gunshot wounds, whereas the Marine Corps armor lacks as much overall protection but has much more protection over vital areas. The Marines' armor is lighter but their packs are heavier. The Stormtrooper's helmet obscures the wearer's vision but also gives him access to a lot of important information and data. Each armor seems to be built with a different combat philosophy and has its own strengths and weaknesses. Like the Marines, the Stormtroopers oftentimes depend on other branches of the military for support, whether that's Star Destroyers from the Navy or Imperial Army AT-ATs. Much like Marine Navy Corpsmen, the Army's Imperial Combat Drivers oftentimes serve alongside with the Stormtrooper Corps and generally are seen as honorary Stormtroopers. These were elite Imperial Army pilots and drivers that helped support the Stormtroopers with transportation and additional firepower. We've done several videos about how the giant AT-AT walkers are generally flawed in design. They're way too exposed and pointless in urban areas. The smaller AT-ST are more maneuverable and can go places that most tracked vehicles can go, but again, they're way too large and vulnerable to be effective armor. What we're left with is the TX-225 GAV-W Occupier Combat Assault Tank. Now at first glance, this looks like the Stormtroopers' response to the M1 Abrams main battle tank. But upon closer inspection, this Occupier is not really a battle tank, it's more of an assault gun carrier. It has 3 forward-facing medium laser cannons that can only swivel up and down. It's mainly used in an infantry support role, and it's not really all that effective against enemy armor. The Stormtroopers also utilized Imperial troop transports, which were powered by repulsor lifts, allowing them to travel over rough ground with a top speed of 150 kilometers. For longer range travel, the Lambda-class shuttle was used. These ships were capable of spaceflight as well as atmospheric flight, which far surpasses the Marines' operational range. These shuttles were heavily armored with multiple lasers for an assault landing, but the landing ramp was forward-facing and quite narrow, creating a dangerous bottleneck. The Stormtroopers also received support from Navy pilots and Army pilots. This came in the form of the standard TIE Fighter, TIE Bomber, and TIE Striker. Lastly, and probably most importantly, artillery support usually came from Star Destroyers up in orbit, which is probably one of the most terrifying things a Rebel Alliance soldier can experience. While the Marine Corps does rely on the Army, Navy, and Air Force for support on the battlefield, they do have their own armor, artillery, and even pilots. The Marine Corps' aviation branch is made up of several different types of helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft. Most of these vehicles need to be able to operate from a carrier deck, so no A-10 Warthog, those are operated by the Air Force. Instead, the Marine uses the F-18 Hornet as a multi-role fighter, Harriers to fill the ground attack role. But like the rest of the US military, they're slowly integrating the F-35 Lightning. The Marine version of the F-35, known as the F-35B, will have vertical takeoff and landing capabilities, which works well with an expeditionary infantry force who might not have access to actual runways. The main disadvantage that Imperial aviators have over the Marines is that they use line-of-sight weapons like laser cannons. The Marines, on the other hand, use long-range missiles, which means they can engage a TIE fighter many miles before they even see them. While the Marines will be able to dominate airspace, they have no space-capable vehicles, which is where the Empire has a huge advantage. The Marines also have their own artillery. It might not be as powerful as a Star Destroyer, but it's definitely very accurate and precise. We're talking about the M777 150mm howitzer. The 150 is designed to be light enough so that the Marines' transport aircraft can lift it into combat, whether that be a Chinook or an Osprey. Marine armor consists of mainly the M1A1 Abrams battle tank, which has an advanced composite armor, which is highly heat resistant and probably would be able to withstand most Stormtroopers' small arms and even direct blows from heavier energy weapons. The Marines also utilize a few different variants of the LAV. By far the most common transport the Marines use are the Humvees, but they are currently trying to replace these vehicles because they are extremely vulnerable to explosions and IEDs. The JLTV is selected to replace the Humvees, but they are not operational just yet. The Marines also use MRAPs, which are mine resistant, but these vehicles are way too large to replace the Humvees' role. The Stormtroopers will always have more firepower if they have access to a Star Destroyer, which might be why they put so little attention into the design of their armor and ground forces, which are clearly inferior to the Marines' battle tanks and infantry. The Stormtrooper Corps is generally much more mobile than the Marine Corps, and that's usually because there's only one Star Destroyer assigned to an entire region of space, so those Stormtroopers might have to travel several light years in a day's mission. The Stormtrooper Corps also has the ability to fight in space. Now, I'm pretty sure that most Marines would be okay with strapping a rocket onto their back and then holding their breath so that they could fight in space. It's just not practical. It shouldn't surprise you that the Marines have less capable vehicles in general than the Stormtrooper Corps. One, it's because Star Wars is a lot more advanced when it comes to technology, and also the Marines are an expeditionary infantry force. The Marines are all about getting into battle as quickly as they possibly can with their mobile forces. Once they have established a beachhead, the Army comes in and brings the firepower. Once again, we see that the Marines have carefully chosen their vehicles based on combat experience and need, while the Stormtrooper Corps' vehicles are kind of more hit and miss, and certain ones are designed more for propaganda and scaring civilian populaces than actual practicality. So guys, that is our quick look at the equipment and vehicles of the Stormtrooper Corps compared to the Marine Corps. We continue this series in our next episode. We'll be looking at how these infantry units are deployed and what their combat history has been like. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on that awesome video. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.